So what is included in my executive physical? I've designed my executive physical to be the most comprehensive evaluation you can receive in the world. And many other executive physical programs, especially from conventional doctors, only do superficial testing. So I did another video talking about the iceberg effect, how there's diseases that you can see, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, and not investigating anything beneath the waterline and what's below the surface, because what's below the surface is ultimately what's causing the tip of the iceberg. So in this diagram, conventional medicine is only looking at diseases, late stages of illness, and then of course late signs and symptoms, whereas a functional medicine doctor is going to look beneath this. So I'm just going to jump right in, but if you want to understand more about this paradigm of the iceberg, refer to my other video where I compare functional medicine to conventional medicine. So we're going to jump right in. In conventional medicine, they're heavily focused on the diseases that are killing Americans, as we all are: heart attacks and strokes, cancer, COPD, and dementia. So a lot of executive physical programs just focus on the heart attacks. And the way they're going to do that is they're going to do a stress test, they're going to do an echo, they're going to do an EKG, and they're going to say, oh, all that checked out fine, your heart's as healthy as a horse. But what they haven't looked at is they haven't looked at the inflammatory testing that lies beneath the surface. And this inflammatory testing creates the problem that generates the atherosclerosis, or the blood vessel thickening, so that you can detect this years before it ever becomes a heart attack. Not only can you detect it, but in functional medicine, we can reverse it by investigating everything down below. So in my executive physical, I do all of those things, but I also combine a pulmonary function test, which many of the executive physicals do to evaluate your lung function test. But what I do is I pair my pulmonary function test with the stress testing, and when you pair those two together, you actually get a lung assessment while on the stress test machine, and that gives you an evaluation of your VO2 max, your fitness level, how much oxygen were you able to take out of the air while you were exercising. And so you may not have any signs of blood vessel disease or a heart attack that's impending, but if I can show you that your VO2 is dropping, or your VO2 is not healthy enough for your age, then that says that we have some work to do beneath the iceberg that you may not even know yet. Another thing that executive physical programs do is they'll tell you that they're going to look for cancer, and they're going to do a CAT scan by doing that. So that's great and all if it detects cancer in its early stages, but the problem with doing a CAT scan at this early stage when you don't have any symptoms is that it's radiation. So the very thing they're trying to detect and save your life from, CAT scans actually cause. So unfortunately, CAT scans are radiation. So you are going to get a dose of radiation, and the more radiation you get, the earlier cancer you get. So I'm not the biggest fan of doing CAT scans, although I can always order it if someone really chooses. The next thing that some executive physicals do is that they will do a carotid age, or a CIMT. This is a great test. It's an ultrasound on your neck, and it gives you a blood vessel age by measuring the microscopic thickness of your carotid artery. And based on that thickness, they can compare you to the general population and say, oh, your thickness is that of a 90-year-old, or your thickness is that of a 30-year-old. And by doing that, it can give you an age compared to yourself to see if you're right on track or average, or if you're below average, meaning you're younger, or if you're above average, meaning you're older than yourself. So this can give you a great idea on what maybe has been happening underneath for years and decades. But once again, this is a later sign and symptom. There are much earlier signs and symptoms. Another thing that conventional medicine is going to do is they're going to do a superficial blood test. So they're going to check your cholesterol. Of course, they're going to check your blood pressure. They may even check some thyroid markers. They may even check your testosterone, but they're not doing a deep dive into any of those hormones. And they're also not going to look at your testosterone and your female hormones with a lot of balance in mind, as far as they're not going to scrutinize those hormones. Whereas when I do a hormone test, I'm going to do a full battery of testing. Your adrenals, your full thyroid panel, including your active T3 and your reverse T3. Most conventional doctors are only checking your TSH, where I check all of them. And then of course the sexual hormones, as we mentioned, the testosterone, the estrogens, your menopause, and then of course the growth hormone. Growth hormone being your youth hormone, your vital hormone. So without enough growth hormone, the aging process starts accelerating. So we can check that, and there are ways we can boost it if it's low, using peptides and exercise and nutrition to boost that. So as far as conventional medicine is concerned, everything that I have circled in black is what a typical conventional medical doctor is going to do in an executive physical. Well, my executive physical goes a lot deeper than that. So not only do I do everything except the CAT scan that they're doing for the cancer, I'm going to do everything and much, much more. So let's go over some of those pieces start to finish. So once again, I mentioned the CMET already, so we don't need to discuss that. That's where we're pairing the stress test and the breathing test in order to get that VO2 max, as well as all the other components that go with that. We're going to do a CNS Vital Signs. That's a test on your brain function. Do you have brain fog? Do you have early signs of dementia and not notice it yet? Do you have early signs of memory loss or spatial recognition, language? We're going to do a body composition. We're going to look at your weight. We're going to look at your fat percentage. We're going to look at your muscle mass and see where that proportion is and what we need to do as far as nutrition and health in order to reset that. Because a healthy body is not an overweight body. Are you carrying visceral fat around your organs? That visceral fat, everyone thinks it's the pudge that sticks out. That's not visceral fat. Visceral fat is the fat you can't see. It's the fat around your heart, fat around your liver. That's inflammatory fat and it's dangerous. We like to think of that visceral fat as the organs using it to protect themselves, to pad themselves. And the reason why is because they're inflamed, so they're trying to cover themselves. I don't think that's entirely true, but it sounds really good. But that visceral fat we know is inflammatory, dangerous fat. Of course, we're going to check the cholesterol, the blood pressure, but we're going to do this max pulse test. And this max pulse test is a device you wear on your finger. It checks the compliance of your arteries. How well does that heartbeat get from your heart all the way to the tips of your finger? Is that capillary receiving that blood, opening up with plenty of nitric oxide? And then is it squeezing down on that heartbeat to keep the blood flow moving? You can detect very, very early signs of disease with this max pulse. So in realm of start to finish, before you get to the heart attack, the first signs of any kind of blood vessel disease is inflammation. You may have gut issues or toxin issues or hormone issues, but the very first signs of blood vessel disease is inflammation. After the inflammation has been going on for quite a while, years, then you can start to see it in your max pulse, that tiny little artery, the capillary in your finger. Then after this has been going on for a prolonged period of time, then your carotid age starts to increase. So this is an even later sign. And then the last thing that increases before you have the heart attack is the stress test. So you can't rely on the stress test as your ultimate means to determine if you're going to have a heart attack or not. That is the last thing that happens. So if you're watching these other markers before then that gives you an idea if you're at risk or not. So the max pulse is a wonderful test. The calcium score is a good test. It's of course another CAT scan where you can get radiation, but it gives you how much calcium may have developed around your heart and in your blood vessels. This is once again a later sign of disease. The max pulse picks it up much sooner, and this is radiation, so I like to avoid it as much as possible. And then we get into the detailed functional medicine stuff. Everything below this pink line, usually conventional medicine doesn't touch at all, except maybe a couple thyroid and testosterone markers. But the big one is the inflammatory markers. There are multiple inflammatory markers that can give you an idea of, are your kidneys inflamed? Do you have myeloperoxidase or LPPLA2? Some of those late stages of inflammation that begin affecting your carotid artery and ultimately lead to heart attacks and strokes. Do you have CRP, which is made by the liver, saying that, oh, there's inflammation in the gut and there's inflammation somewhere and the immune system needs to go get it? Do you have F2 isoprostanes, which comes from the inside of the blood vessel wall saying, hey, there's damage, come help me? So we can test all of these things in blood and urine, and that can give you an early sign of, am I in trouble? Am I developing some of these things even before you ever have any signs or symptoms of them? We need to be checking that inflammation. Of course, autoimmunity is a component of this inflammation. All of these pieces of the pie cause inflammation, and inflammation triggers autoimmunity. And some of that autoimmunity means you're attacking yourself. You're attacking your brain, causing brain fog and early signs of dementia. You're attacking your kidneys, spilling microscopic protein. Whatever it may be, this autoimmunity is damaging your system, and we need to reverse that. This is simply done with blood and urine tests, but we're not going to stop there. We're going to go through all of these. We're going to test gut health. We're going to test your gut health by doing comprehensive stool studies. By doing this, we can get a look at your microbiome. How are you digesting your food? Are you spilling proteins and fats in your stool? Is there inflammation inside of your bowels coming out in your stool? Is there healthy amounts of fiber? Are you breaking down that fiber correctly? Is there a yeast or bacterial overgrowth in those bowels? We can determine all that from a stool study. We can take that a bit further and do an organic acids test, which is also part of the executive physical. What this is going to do is look at those bacterial, yeast, and mold markers, metabolites that may be growing in your system, and it can tell us if you have an overgrowth or a presence of that that's actually growing inside you that we need to eradicate. Then, of course, there's the toxic overload. This is a big problem. We are exposed to tons of chemicals and things that we would have never been exposed to in the Paleolithic era. So there's biological toxins like Lyme disease and mycoplasma and Marcons. We're going to test for all of those. There's mold toxins. Almost everyone has been exposed to mold, but some people have been exposed to mold inside water-damaged buildings where the air conditioning system circulates it and hyperconcentrates it over time because we live in sealed buildings. And so mold exposure causes tremendous amounts of brain fog, heart attacks, inflammation, autoimmunity. Mold causes everything. So we're going to check your urine for those mold toxins in your urine. We're going to check your urine for chemicals, things like glyphosate, which is Roundup, and herbicides and pesticides, and chemicals that may be on your food, in your water, things that you don't even know you've been exposed to, but your body may have accumulated. We can check that in your urine. Then, of course, we're going to do your heavy metal testing at some point. This is not a part of the initial executive physical. The reason why is because we have to make sure you're healthy enough before we can proceed to heavy metal chelation. That we will discuss more at your appointment. And then, of course, nutrition. We've got to find out how your gut looks, how your hormones are, and we can pick the right food plan for you. But we're going to take it a step further, and we're going to do celiac testing to make sure you're not highly sensitive to gluten or allergic to gluten, as we commonly say. But the other thing we're going to do is food sensitivity testing. Are you sensitive to foods that you may not even realize you're sensitive to, whether it be corn, spinach, a perfectly healthy food like tomatoes? And so if we can do this food sensitivity testing, we can try to cut down on some of that inflammation that you're triggering and you don't even know because you're eating a perfectly healthy food. Of course, you may not be eating perfect, and that's what we're going to help you with as far as choosing the right food plan that will reduce the inflammation. Then, of course, we're going to do an in-detail hormone evaluation. I've kind of talked about all of this when we were talking about the conventional stuff. But the adrenal testing is how much cortisol you're making, how much stress hormone are you making. We can do this by doing urine tests. The rest of these are easy blood samples. And then, of course, we can measure your energy function. How much energy are you producing? Where is it gone dysfunctional? We can check a Nutri-Eval, or we will check a Nutri-Eval, an organic acids test, in order to determine what your mitochondria are doing. The mitochondria are the organelles inside of every cell that have to manufacture the energy. So we eat proteins, fats, and carbs, but your mitochondria have to turn that into energy. And those mitochondria are broken or not working properly, then you can see their energy dysfunction, and that can give us a guide as to what other things that we need to check and evaluate. So as you can tell, in my executive physical, we're going to take you from top to bottom. We're not only going to look at late stages of signs and symptoms and disease, but we're going to look underneath the hood. We're really going to see what's going on deep down inside your system to find out what may be triggering early signs of inflammation before they become disease.